so crooked. Sorry if I'm making a bunch of noise. I know there's somebody viewing this. Trying to get the microphone situated. Lies and deceit. Oh well, she's just gonna hang today. It's just massively crooked. That's okay, wabi sabi.
Hi, I'm Alicia.
Jackie.
Nice to meet you.
Meet you.
Love standing to the traffic.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Starting into Austin traffic real fast.
I know.
it's an experience.
Lacey's starting to catch it. Slowly. I'll take it. At least we have AC.
Yeah.
There are still temples that do not. We're just giving it a few more minutes and we'll get started. Make sure everything's silenced. No bucket notification in the middle or anything.
So many books up here.
Yeah, so I was telling her that this corner over here is the English corner, and then the rest of the books are either in Chinese or Vietnamese.
Just this?
Yeah.
There's that many?
Yes. And that whole area up there, like behind, that's where the abbot would typically sit.
Uh-huh.
Those are all like the big Buddhist books that I want. I'm trying to like think of the best verbiage. Hey, Hyman, how you doing?
Good. How about you, Marissa?
You know, it could be cooler.
I was thinking of bringing a sweater. I was like, it might be cold. I was like, probably
I
not.
turned it down to 70, but it's taking a minute to catch up. I can't blame it.
No worries.
I know, right? We're air conditioned.
These are pretty sturdy. I guess because they're hardly used, as opposed to the
Well,
ones.
I was like, they brought these up from the Buddha Hall, but
Oh,
they
okay.
usually stay in here for tea time.
Gotcha. I was like,
They're
oh,
probably
these
way less used than the ones
are, I was like, oh, these are sturdier than the other ones.
So do you go over like a good book to like start with for beginners?
We have some book suggestions, and afterwards I'd be happy to show you. So we have the primary place you can find that is on our Facebook page. We have an album because Facebook won't let you put book recommendations. Like they used to have a section for it, and they got rid of it. So now we made a photo album on there with the different book recommendations, and then it gives like the Amazon description and then the ISBNs so you can find them. But like right now, if you are interested, I don't know if it's checked out right now, but there's a book that they're going over for the Wednesday evening meditation, and they're going chapter by chapter.
Oh, that one. Oh, sorry to interrupt, but that's on the archives.com. You can see it there for free.
Yeah, I was like, it's everywhere online. It's a PDF version, or if you feel like you would like to purchase the book, you can. But yeah, thankfully a lot of Buddhist books you can find them for. So that's nice. But yeah, get with me afterwards, and this is my librarian. This is my wife, but she's also really savvy about like different books for beginners too, which is really good.
Oh, good.
Not happening. That's fine. We're here. Last time we had like 13 people.
Yeah, that's what she
So I
was
was like,
saying.
I was like, let's see. I was like, let's see today. We'll see. I'm trying to mess with a couple different days because.
Well, I think it's kind of hard to judge after a day because people are away. Like, you know, people go on vacation. Like,
Well, it's
before
like
a day.
either we do it on Sundays before our meditations or a Saturday, or a Friday evening. That way, like people are off
I
work.
kind of like it. I mean,
Probably because of 4th of July yesterday.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. No worries. Okay. I'm just trying to open up the YouTube real quick on my computer as well in case there's any questions on the chat. That way I can see them. Okay. One more minute, just in case, and then we'll too chilly. You might want just adjust some things. Then after a while, when the AC actually like really picks up here, it'll get really cold really fast.
that's funny.
It's like as soon as it picks up, it's super cold. I was up here earlier. I was like, ooh, like shivering. Can you hear me better now? No, there's a lag too. This is hard to hear.
Oh.
I'm going to have to talk very loud. Alright, we'll get started and we'll figure it out. If you want to, I don't know if we unplug it at this point, if it'll mess up the audio. We have that fancy microphone that makes it very nice and clear. Okay, so we'll go ahead and get started. So welcome. I know a couple of you guys are new here today. Thank you for coming. So my name is Marissa. My Buddhist name is Tan An Heng. I'm still getting used to saying that after 3 years. It's a Vietnamese name, and from what I've been told, it means stillness or peace. So that's what my name means, to practice towards that within this life. That's how that works in Buddhist names. You don't have to have a Buddhist name to be considered Buddhist or practice Buddhist notions, and you don't have to identify as Buddhist. You can be any religion and still practice these things, and even learning some of the things that we're learning that may be a little bit more on the religious aspect still can help you in your own thoughts and ideas. So we'll go expanding onto that in a little bit. I'm going to start by ringing the bell 3 times slowly. So we'll all center ourselves for a moment. Close your eyes if you like, you don't have to. And I encourage you with each bell tone to take a deep breath in and out. After 3 bells, that will be the end, and then you can open your eyes. Hello, come on in, sit down wherever you like. So we're gonna begin with a bell, just to start. We'll do 3 tones, slowly. Each tone, I encourage you to just take a nice deep breath in and out.
Okay.
And then after the 3rd bell tone, you can open your eyes.
Okay.
I like the bells. They ring forever. Okay, so I'm going to go over just a little bit briefly because we have an hour and we really do crunch a whole lot of topic. Today what we're going to discuss are the bigger topics in Buddhism, so I don't want to speed through them too much. And then Amaya also has some things. Her Buddhist name is also Tan An Tan. I don't know if you remember what that means. So the translations can be rough too, so we're still figuring out our names, and then together our name actually means something too. So that's a whole thing. But she has some things that she'll expand on with quotes from books and things that will kind of just really get your mind thinking about kind of like the other way to think about things. So last time, I'm just going to go over the basic topics of what we discussed last time. And if you want to see that video, it's on the YouTube account after. I can get you linked with that if you like. And you can go through and watch that video on fast. You can make it go faster. And then you can learn about those topics we discussed last time. So we talked about the ringing of the bell and why we ring the bell, particularly like why 3 times, why we ring a bell. We talked about there are 3 main sects of Buddhism: Theravada, Mahayana, and I can't ever say this one right, but I'm going to try, Vajrayana. And the primary sect of Buddhism practiced at this temple space is Mahayana. We talked a little bit about the robes and what they symbolize. That primary thing is the letting go of ego and unification. We also talked about, which I can't quite summarize, but it's always an intriguing topic for us Westerners, why does Buddha have a swastika? And what does that mean? We also talked about the items that you typically see on the altars, especially here in the Buddha halls that you see, and what those things reference. What do they mean, or what are you supposed to reflect on when you see them? We also talked about the act of bowing. Why do we prostrate, like before we meditate and after we meditate? Why do we bow? So today we're going to talk about bodhisattvas, which the only equivalent terminology I can come up with is to say that they're similar to saints, if you're familiar with Catholicism. Similar, not necessarily the same, but it's the closest word I can term to make sense. We're also going to discuss a phrase that you hear a lot here, which is Namo Adida Phut, or we shorten it as to Adida Phut. We'll talk about that phrase and what that means. We'll also discuss, and last time we discussed the 4 Noble Truths as well. That was like the main section of what we talked about. So just to give you the brief on what 4 Noble Truths, I'm just going to read them, and then that prior video goes over them in depth. So it is the truth of the cause of suffering, the truth of the end of suffering, and the truth that there's the path that leads to the end of suffering.
What is that again?
Yeah, I'll repeat them one more time.
No, but I'm saying, what is
The
it?
4 Noble Truths.
Okay.
So that is basically the essence of Buddhist teachings. That is like the core. So there's also something that goes with the 4 Noble Truths, and it's called the Eightfold Path. My computer decided to just close notes on me, so while I'm saying this, I'm opening them up. And the Eightfold Path, they tie in with the 4 Noble Truths. Currently, our abbot, Patien, he's going over the Eightfold Path every Sunday, and we're recording him. So if you want to, same thing, on the YouTube, if you want to go back and see them, we're trying to figure it out because the recording is a little rough because the mic system, it echoes. So it could be a little hard to hear him. But it's everywhere out there. It doesn't have to be our abbot that you hear it from either. And then eventually, as we go, not today, but as we start these classes, I'll start tying in the Eightfold Path. So we'll learn those individually for each class, and then we can use those as discussion points. Okay, what else? So today we're going to talk about bodhisattvas. We're also going to talk about the notion of karma, enlightenment, and nirvana, or the other phrase, the other way you say that is nirvana. So without the V, it's pronounced in Pali. And then, like I said, Amaya has some highlights she'll go over about those topics as well. So bodhisattvas, like I said, they're kind of like the Buddhist saints. There's a lot of them. I tried to look up the literal, like, how many are there? Because there's main ones here. A lot of the things I cover here are things that you encounter, particularly while you're here. to kind of like help people understand like what are you seeing when you come to a temple space. In most temples, you will see these things, you'll encounter them no matter where you go. If it's Chinese influence, you may see them looking a little different than you do, like for example at this temple, but in general, they're the same basic notion of who they are. There, from what I have learned, are over 80,000 different bodhisattvas. Yeah, let's take that in for a second. The main ones that are primarily focused on, as they call them, the sons of Buddha. They weren't literal sons of Buddha, but that's the terminology. There's 8. I'm not going to cover all 8. I'm going to cover the main ones that we see here a lot at our temple. I have the list if anyone is curious of those main 8 and their Pali names. If I say them out loud, nobody will like me. Try to spell them, forget it. Like, go ahead, I'll give you the easiest one I know of. Avalokiteshvara. And I'll spell that real quick. So, just to give you an idea. So, we're going to just start diving right in. So, the main, one of the main bodhisattvas, particularly in Mahayana Buddhism that we see often, and you saw her as you pulled up, was the large statue of a woman. And she's that giant white statue over by the parking lot. Her name is Guanam or Guan Yin, depending on the country of origin you're in. So you'll hear her a lot as Guanam here because this is a Vietnamese temple. So you hear a lot of the bodhisattvas' names in Vietnamese. But their names might differ depending on the culture that you're seeing them in. So just be aware of that, because I was trying to look up bodhisattva names in different cultures is interesting and fun to try to pronounce.
And what is it called here? I'm sorry. In Vietnamese? Guan.
Yep, Guan. Or excuse me, it's Kuan. I misspelled that. Am. Kuan. Next word, am. She is also known, so there's a chant that we often encounter, like on our meditation days, we chant afterwards. And one of those sutras that we go through, there's the terminology that she is also known as Avalokiteshvara. So there's like one that sticks in my head, Avalokiteshvara, while practicing empty, yeah. That one, yeah, now it'll be there when I sleep tonight. So she embodies the notion of compassion. And that's why when they chant and when you look at a bodhisattva, I guess when you look, sometimes you may come to a temple space and you'll see somebody appearing to pray to them. Intents of purposes, that is a form of prayer. But not prayer the same way you might know it in Christianity or Catholicism. It's the envisionment of self. And so, like anything here in the space, whether it's the bodhisattvas, the Buddha, a book, each other, you name it, altar items, they're all meant as a reflection. So they're meant to invoke in you, okay, this thing represents something, and the thing that represents, I'm going to reflect on it so that I can try to embody that compassion with like Guanam and reflect on what I need to do within myself to evoke compassion. So I might reflect on her and say like, okay, well, who was Guanam? What did she do? Why does she represent compassion? How do I instill that? Like maybe I need to be more open to what people have to say. It could be something that simple. It could be more complicated. There's also some other notions that people believe that she embodies as well, like the notion of fertility. To some degree, there's also, I feel like every bodhisattva somehow has wealth associated to them. So there's always that. But it's not necessarily in the notion of like Jesus or God where you're praying to an entity for them to give you something in return. It's not that notion. But it can be, and I'm going to twist y'all's mind a little bit. I'm not going to go heavy deep into things. We're staying on the surface because we can get really deep down rabbit holes. there are some sects of Buddhism that are primarily that kind of religious sense. And so for each person it may be different, and that's why it can be helpful if you are trying to decide about if you want to practice a particular sect of Buddhism in a path, that you read up on that, because it can help you determine, like, if you like the notions of praying to saints, if you're used to like Catholic notions and you like that transition, that can maybe help you to look up like Theravadan Buddhism, because there's more of like a spiritualness to it. So it can kind of depend on who you are. So some people literally do pray in that sense, with the notion of hoping that they can have the universe help them with that coming up in that sense. So let's say like compassion, that hopefully the universe will help me with that compassion. And we'll touch very slightly on that. You'll kind of start rounding this thought out in a little while when we talk about karma and enlightenment and nirvana. So that's just one. So oftentimes you see her depicted as a woman. Just know that all bodhisattvas are technically formless. And so we see them as we need to see them. So sometimes you may see Guanam also in the male form. So there's actually some in the gift shop. I'm like, huh, or just kind of like genderless. One thing I like to point out is that you often see Guanam with magnolia trees. And there's a significance behind that. So like after today, when you guys go walk around and things, because I know you'll be like, oh, I have a tree. There's several statues of her. There's the giant one up here, and then there's also a smaller one off this way in we call it the rock garden, Zen garden. And she also has magnolia trees around her over there as well, just smaller ones. And then over here, there's magnolia trees. Magnolia trees are known to bloom whenever they choose to. There's no like, it's springtime, I bloom. It's fall, I bloom. Like it just, whenever. The notion of the tree as well is also meant similar to Guanyin, that embodies that like notion of compassion and new beginnings. So a lot of people, when they see the representation, again, it's a way to reflect. Like, okay, like I'm starting anew and now I can move forward on this path, whatever that may be for you. I'm gonna come back to that one. I have one that I just actually recently learned about myself, and it like my brain exploded for a little while, because you always will learn something. I'll come back to that, but this bodhisattva I'll talk about in a minute is actually similar to Guanam, but so one of the other more frequent bodhisattvas you'll see is named Bodhi. And he often gets the name the joyful Buddha, laughing Buddha, fat Buddha, jolly Buddha, you name it. You often see him a lot in Chinese culture. But we have like the big Bodhi statues when you're coming in the parking lot and he's greeting you as you're driving in. That's Bodhi. So he is believed to be the reincarnation of the future Buddha known as Maitreya. I know that's a whole concept in and of itself. Just take that with a full grain of salt. I know that's a lot to digest. You're like, whoa, wait, a future Buddha, what? Yeah, just take that one with a grain of salt. Just know that that's an actual teaching, a thing. He was actually a monk who lived in China, and so that's why a lot of Chinese culture, like when you go to a Chinese restaurant, you will see Bodhi. Most often than not, you will see a statue of him somewhere. So he's seen often carrying a sack, and he represents joy, prosperity, and positive energy. That's why he's always like happy and jovial. He also kind of has this linkage with children, like a protectorate of children. And so, like in our gift shop, we actually have a couple of statues of him where there's children all around him. And you'll see him a lot too, where that's the same out in the world. You'll see him with statues where he's with children. And that's the thing. He was known as the monk. He would often have a sack with him of a few belongings, and he'd almost always have goodies with him that he would give to kids. So little, trinkets and snacky things to eat. So kids really liked it. So that's primarily him. the next one is Bodhidharma. So he may be a lesser known figure that you don't, I mean, you hear about Bodhidharma quite a bit, but you don't necessarily hear about him a whole lot. And there are a few statues of him here. There's one actually behind Bodhi. So as you're coming in, the Jolly Buddha, he's not technically Buddha, but we're all Buddha. That's the whole Buddhist concept. We all have the Buddha mind. We all have that concept within us. But people often call Bodhi Buddha, like the fat Buddha. It's not. He's not actually Gautama Siddhartha, the Buddha that we know as Amitabha Buddha. Just wanted to clear that. So Bodhidharma is a statue behind, and when you first look at it, it looks just like a rock, a very tall rock. And when you actually look at it, you'll see at the very top of it, there's actually a face carved into that rock, like a head. And you'll see him a lot in Japanese culture. He was actually a monk who they believe he's possibly Indian or from East Asia. And there's quite a few stories that differ about him. And he was the monk who brought Buddhism to Japan. So there are stories that say that he has blue eyes. So sometimes you'll hear him referred to as the blue-eyed demon. That's a cultural thing. So if you know anything about Asian cultures and people who have blue eyes, it was not very favorable at the time. Western culture did some nasty things. So that's a name you sometimes will hear him referred to, especially if you read into like the Japanese portions of Buddhism. So he literally taught meditation. That was his whole thing. He brought meditation the way that we know meditation, the way that we practice right now. That's who was supposedly brought the notion of meditation, was Bodhidharma. And he taught that the path to enlightenment was through meditation. And there are tons of legends that surround him, and a lot of Buddhist stories are not necessarily that they're true, but they're meant to make you question and reflect. So don't take it literal at times, especially when you hear kind of like folklorish type stories. It's just meant to help you reflect on notions so that you can come to a deeper understanding. The other place that you'll see him here at our temple is in this smaller prayer hall. So we're in the library space right now. The building that's right in front of us when you walk out, that's the prayer hall. It's a smaller version of our bigger Buddha hall where we meditate. Same thing, we meditate there as well. And on the main altar when you walk in, you'll see a smaller statue of him. Same concept. It's almost like formless as far as body. You just usually see like the bust of him. I don't know why it's always just the bust of him. I haven't learned that part yet, but it's like always just from here to here. I'm like, I don't know. I think it's just artistic creativity. I don't know. One of the lesser known, so those are like the big three that you see most often. Those are kind of like, I call it the Trinity, right? Like those are the ones you see, well, there's four, because you see Buddha too. Those are the ones you're going to see the most. Like, especially Mahayana temples when you go, those are the most frequent you'll see. There's one that I like to highlight because it's in the gift shop, and one of the bigger statues you'll see is in that prayer hall. And it took me a long time to understand who that bodhisattva was. I don't understand. Is it another Buddha? Like, is it another form of? I was really confused at first, and so then I started gaining this knowledge, right? So the way it's pronounced, and again the spelling, is you can't sound it out. It's Sitigarba, or in Japanese, what I find easier to pronounce is Jizo. 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 Am I pronouncing that right? Okay, she knows a little bit of Japanese, so like making sure. He was the bodhisattva that vowed to not stop. Basically, he didn't want to go into nirvana. and no longer exists. Stay with me, we'll talk about that later. That's what bodhisattvas do. They basically said, hey, I know I have the ability at this time, like I'm at that step where I can go to nirvana and not exist anymore, not be reborn, but there's so much suffering here on earth that, or even in, there's other realms in some notions of Buddhism, that they vow to use that time, let's call it life, whether it's this realm or not, to help those who are suffering in those ways that they were known for. So those embodiments like compassion and like, you know, bringing joy and wealth and those types of things. So Siddhi Garba realized there's a whole story around Siddhi Garba, and I encourage you to go read up on it. Unfortunately, I can't give all the stories of all the bodhisattvas because they're just extensive, and there's so many. So he represents kind of the underworld, like hell, the notion of hell, if you want to call it that. Now in Buddhism, just know that hell can be a realm, but it also is the state of existence on earth. So when you hear hell, it can be used interchangeably. Just depends on what you're reading and who's talking about it. So he realized that there was, you know, people who are basically condemned by doing bad things in life, that they go to this notion of hell, that he wanted to help them get out of that suffering, that form of suffering. So he wants to make sure that he can help all those beings to come up from that. But you don't often hear too much about him, and a lot of people, I mean, there's superstitions within, you know, every religion, and there's even superstition in Buddhism too, to some degree. So some people, you won't see them necessarily in their home, but you may see them in a temple space. Because sometimes there's that, like, almost like, oh, if I put them there, then the negative spirits, that kind of thing. So sometimes you won't see that. Some people may not want to, like, purchase that type of statue to have at home. Some people would. I feel like it's a reminder for my own self. It's a way for me to reflect, right? So I'm like, okay, so I'm reflecting on, like, how am I creating my own hell? And it doesn't have to be the notion of what am I, you know, my hell after I die, per se, but it can be what am I doing to create my own hell right now? So there's ways you can utilize it. So what I teach often for people is that just know that, like I said, it is a form of religion, Buddhism, and you can take from it what you feel is compelling for you and leave what is not. It's kind of different than some of the other religious setups where it's like, no, you gotta believe that or nothing. It's not an all or nothing situation. It's what works for you and what sounds like, and then you just move on. So these things exist as they are. If that doesn't sit with you, you just move past them. So the one I wanted to touch on, and this is kind of just a brief one, I just learned about this and this totally blew my mind. And I will show you guys a picture when we're done so you can understand. And there's one in the gift shop down below too. There is a not very well known, she's known but not very well known, bodhisattva, who you often see depicted with, okay, so you have Amitabha Buddha, the statue, and then you'll have one arm, and then you'll have another figure. And for the longest time, I was like, oh, I thought it was just like them making a pretty statement. You know, like, oh, it looks nice in threes, you know, like something like that. And then I just recently learned that that was another bodhisattva, and I was like, what? They look very similar. The only main difference is when you see like kind of the headdress area. Guanam is usually seen with kind of like the flowing, almost mother, like the Virgin Mary. So when you see her, you often see her with kind of that veil going down the back with the little crown on top. And the other, and this, hold tight with me, this name, okay, I'm still learning to say this one. Mahastema Papta. There was not a shorter way I could figure out how to say that one. There is also a name for her in Vietnamese culture, and I, for the life of me, could not pronounce it, and I don't want to do that ill justice. So there's that. And she is she's kind of hand in hand with what you see with Guanam too. So you often see her, and she's supposed to be kind of the embodiment of Buddha's wisdom. And so she is that representation of the notion of wisdom. You don't often see her a whole lot, but she does exist, and she's just as important, if not equal, if you will, than Guanam. But you don't see her a whole lot. I think that's more just the beautification. I mean, we're all creatures, right? We're all humans, so we like what we see sometimes. So we're like, oh, that's prettier. Yeah, so you take that home with you. But just know, yeah, you do see her. Like I said, you see her here. You won't necessarily see her like in the Buddha halls, but down in the gift shop, she's definitely here. And there's another Buddhist temple here in San Antonio that's Mahayana, and they have a large statue of her. As you walk in, it's the trio. And like I said, I was so naive to that for the longest time. I just assumed it was two like Guanyin statues and then Buddha in the middle. And I was like, okay, they're just queuing it up. That was it. So that's kind of the general gist of bodhisattvas. Like I said, they're meant as reflective pieces for you. They embody as you want them to. So, and it's not to say that the statues look, that's not like the true nature of what they look like in life, because they're going to vary depending on where you go, because everyone wants to practice similar to what their own self is. So I still have yet to see an Indian depiction of a Buddha statue. I'm waiting for it. I'm like, we all know he came from India, but where's the Indian Buddha statue? Okay, so next topic. If you guys have questions, we'll go over it at the end. Okay, so hang tight with me. I'm going to try to deliver it, and then you can bombard. So the phrase that you often hear, and you'll hear it most often only in the temple setting. You won't hear it like if you went to Vietnam and you're just walking down the street, people are not going to be like, Namo Adida Phật, Namo Adida Phật. It's just, or Adida Phật, they'll shorten it, Adida Phật. You're not going to hear that like walking the streets. It'll only be in a temple setting. From my knowledge, what I've learned is if you were to say that in general conversation outside of a temple setting, it just literally means like just a jumble of things. So you'd be like, what? Like, it doesn't make true full sense until it's in this setting. So it's a Vietnamese phrase in Buddhism, and I have the breakdown for you. So when the abbot walks in, you'll hear us chanting that as like a song. So we usually put our hands in prayer at our chest. We face each other to the center aisle, and then we sing Adida Phật, Adida, so on and so forth, until the abbot makes it to the front. It's basically a form of respect. So the literal rough translation is that it means homage to the Amitabha Buddha. So take the word Amitabha, just Amitabha is Buddha. Gautama was his name in life. That's who he was as he grew up in India as Prince Siddhartha. So lineage things, that was his name. So you'll hear Siddhartha Gautama, and then what happened? Oh yeah, Amitabha. So it also means, so homage to the Amitabha Buddha. It can also translate to I seek refuge in the Amitabha Buddha. You can also hear Amitabha referred to as Maitreya too. So it can get a little mixed matching. But that's the basic phrase. And when you say it like to a person individually, so if I'm like seeing a monastic and I would say Adida Phật, it's like a greeting of an acknowledgement, like I'm you, you're me, we're all on this path. It's also reminding the other and yourself, like to practice the path of these good things, these good notions, do good, be good, pass along this good in this life, positive karma. We'll get into that next. So there is that notion too, I'll correct myself, that Amitabha I still get confused on that too. The Amitabha is not technically Gautama, like Siddhartha Gautama, but he is a Buddha. And there are many Buddhas. Hang tight, hold on, we're going on the roller coaster. There are many Buddhas, and that's why when we said earlier the notion of Maitreya, which is the future Buddha, there have been many Buddhas, and there will be many more. But the one that we know of, the one that we've learned from in our span of lifetime that he has taught, that's the one that we refer to. So he's the one that you see depicted. But there are other Buddhas. All right, you confused yet? So the next one, we'll talk about karma. These are the big notions, right? These are the things people are like, okay, these are the big guns. Karma, nirvana, enlightenment. How do I get there? What is it? What do I need to do? What's the key? Yeah, so just, I was like, where are we?
Yeah, just take a deep
So, I know, it's a love-hate relationship because they're big topics, but even the bodhisattvas, they're not the biggest topic, but they take time. So if we don't get through all of it today, then we'll come back to what we don't get to next time. I'm just
You
gonna.
don't want to rush.
No, that's a big topic. I'm not rushing that. It's big and small at the same time. That will make sense later. So karma. It's a fundamental concept in Buddhism. And it's the law of moral causation. What is moral causation? I had to think about that for a little while as I was reading my notes. I was like, basically, karma is the notion of cause and effect. Things you do. So if you did something good, if I said, oh, here's $1, right? And that was a good thing that I did, then the effects that will accrue from that are the notions of good. It's cause effect, right? And then you also get good effect too. Like you can go buy nothing with $1 in this economy. You know what I mean? But that's that notion. A sucker. So it's cause and effect is what that means. And so when they say moral causation, it's the moral causation within Buddhism. So it's these pathway notions of what we practice towards to conceptualize what it is to be a Buddhist or practice in that way. And again, I say a lot, you'll hear me say it that way. It's the easiest way for me to phrase it, to be a good Buddhist, to practice that way. You don't have to be Buddhist to practice these notions. I really do identify that the notion of karma, this cause and effect, regardless of your religious background, it truly finds you. Whether or not you want to believe it or not, it's your choice. But I often, we all joke about it, and especially in Western culture, you hear it a lot. You're like, oh, it's karma, but it's not actually like that. And oftentimes when we talk about karma, you almost always hear negative about karma, but there's positive karma too. So everyone forgets that there's positive karma. It's not just the bad stuff you accrue, it's the good things too. So, in the original word karma, you also hear it pronounced like kama. So we have that hard R we like to pronounce. Karma is actually kama. And it literally translates from a Sanskrit word meaning action or deed. So it's the intent. So the actions are not just in the physical. It's within Buddhism. It's what you do from your body, your speech, your mind. Good and bad actions. They can also be neutral. So sometimes neutral could just be like, oh, I see something bad happening, but I'm just doing nothing about it. That can be a neutral thing, right? Doesn't mean that you had a bad thought or a good thought. It's just you chose to do nothing, but you could have done good in that situation, or you also could have done bad. Your choice. That's the very simplified version of the notion of karma. But again, like I said, it's also about the intention you have behind it. So, for example, you may hear someone say, well, like, if you step on a bug, or if you swat a mosquito, that's bad karma, right? sometimes those notions are instinctual. So if my brain is telling my body, hey, you have a pain on your arm, and I don't think about it, and I swat and I kill a mosquito, the notion is that I don't necessarily accrue as much bad karma from that action because I wasn't intentionally doing it. Now, on the flip side, if this isn't obvious, if I look at the mosquito and I go, you dirty, and I go, and I intentionally kill that mosquito, then that's a worser effective karma than if I, unintentionally was doing that. Like if it's just something you did, and you can reflect on it too. If you're like, ooh, I realized what I did was not something I should have done. It was not a good thing, but it happened. I can't take it back. So you just reflect on that and say, and maybe ask yourself, what could I do next time? Is there a way I could maybe not? Like, maybe if I wear mosquito spray, it deters them so that I don't accrue that type of karma by killing something. That's a very basic, like, simple thing I can give you the notion of that can get real wide. So yeah, you have. Let me make sure I got all my notes here. There's types of karma, they say, but I don't think it's something that we practice too heavily about. You may hear skillful or unskillful karma. It's not terms that are thrown around too much that you'll hear. Like you won't initially come to a dharma and then hear like, oh, unskillful karma. It's not that wordy. Just know that there's good, there's bad, and most of the time it's about the intention. So just the action of doing those good things. But there's also that like toxic positivity, right? So you can have essentially the bad effect. Whereas if you were to be like, oh, well, I wanna really give you that dollar, because if I give you that dollar, I know that gets me the good karma, and I want you to know that I'm a good person because I gave you that dollar. Mm-hmm. And then they're gonna see that I gave you the dollar too, and then they're gonna think good things about me. Yeah, it can get a little contextual, but it is representative, because to do good, and you may have heard this even outside of the Buddhist realm, right? Of what's in return, much more happier for it than having the expectation of what you can get out of it. So it's kind of the same general effect, is that when you have the correct thoughts, you do those good things just for the sake of doing it because it's beneficial to, like if she was like, I really need $1, and I'm like, I have $1, that might be my thought. Oh, and then I just get it and I give it to her. She might say thanks, and I go, no problem. We walk away and that's it. And there's not another thought about it for me in that notion. I could just be like, man, I hope she's doing okay. Like that's good karma, because the thoughts are all around it in the right ways. But if I was like, man, what if she uses that $1 and she goes and gets something I don't want her to get with that $1? Well, why do I need to know that? Number one, that's not mine after that point. And now that's a whole other concept of rabbit hole we can go down. But good and bad karma exists. It's a part of the path that helps us to build the notion of what is also called merits. So karma and merits, I struggle with that because I want to use them interchangeably, but they're not necessarily interchangeable terms. So I made a note for myself about this. If I can find it. Help me out here with that one. Karma and merit.
Merit is more of a force or energy.
Can you speak a little louder?
Karma is more.
Yeah.
Karma is more a force or an energy that happens when you do good things, and that can be transferred or used in children.
Yeah, I know. They're very similar, but they're a little bit different.
It also depends how you practice. If you practice the more religious sense, or if you practice more secularly. I practice more secularly, so I have a harder time with the concept of like future merit. But in a sense, some practice it in literally that you're like stockpiling this good energy or this good force, that can present itself at the right time, whether it's in the future, whether it's soon, whether it's in the next life. And some believe that you can also transfer that merit, so when someone dies and you're worried that they don't maybe have enough merit to be born in a good life, you can do prayers and mantras and come together as a community, and you can create good merit by being together and practicing compassion, and you can actually send that merit to that person even in the afterlife so that they can have a better reincarnation.
So it's like all the karma that you like accrued?
Not necessarily.
It's very
So
similar to
this,
merits.
I found my note. So this was the simplest way I could put the terms so that you could understand the similarity and the difference. So karma is the principle that every action, whether it's good or bad, has consequences. I'll repeat that. The principle that every action, whether it's good or bad, has consequences. Merit is the positive energy that's gained from the good actions, which leads to good outcomes. So, like kind of what Amaya said, why do we come together as a sangha? Why do we come together when there's Buddhist events? Why? It's kind of that notion of karma and merits. By the notion of coming, you are obtaining good karma. You're doing something good for the greater good, right? As long as you're not having ill thoughts. Like, I'm going because I'm going to get all the karma. That's the negative accrual, because you're doing it for selfish reasons versus selfless reasons. Merit is when we are collectively together in that situation. In any situation, it could be us right now in this room, and we're all collecting this good energy, this positiveness. We can, in theory, within Buddhism, collectively take that good sense of energy and then we send it up and out through the world or to an entity of our choosing, whether that's a person or like a funeral, right? Like, we want good for that person. If there's a next life, we want them to have, hopefully the next life is a good one for them, not a bad one. So the notion is that you could potentially accrue this positive energy in large sums when there's multiple people doing it together and send that out to the world.
It's very similar to if she was, if you two were friends and she says, well, my mom just passed away, and what do you want to do? You want to almost pass on some good energy, and you're like, oh my God, your family's going to be in my thoughts, I'll be thinking about you, I hope the best, I hope. And you're kind of just sending all this good energy, good merit.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be as like,
yeah.
So it's it's from karma.
Karma's
they go
more
hand
cause
in
and
hand.
effect.
Yeah. So karma is, like I said, karma. Okay, so like I said, let's say there's a Buddhist event, okay, and you're like, okay, I'd like to go to this Buddhist event, and that's where you leave it. And then you're driving there, and you're like, yeah, I'm going to this good event, and I'm gonna get good karma today. And that's kind of the negative, because you're doing it for those selfish reasons, right? Whereas let's say the good karma would be driving there saying, I'm going to go to this event so that I can be there for others, and that hopefully by being there and sending my positive energy with these other people, we can do something good for others. We'll leave that real simple. Like I said, take merit out of that situation. It's just the notion that you're doing something in a way that you're hoping that it can create a greater good. So there's no selfishness in that. You're doing it for the act of selflessness. Like you're coming for the community sense, so that you are there with others to show support, to show that, that as a force that we can be and represent what is good in the universe. So that hopefully enough people start to see, like, wow, I can see the good, I can see the positive things, and I can understand with clarity.
Karma's almost more
Yeah.
tangible. It's more of a cause and effect. If you hit the bell's gonna make a sound. That's cause and effect. Karma's more like, merit's more like when the monks go inside the little paw in the morning and they chant and send that out to the world. They're not ringing a bell. Nothing's gonna like come back at them to acknowledge, hey, you did it. Like, there's not a direct, here's a thing you're doing and this is what happened.
Yeah.
But they're putting that merit out there. It's more of a, for lack of a better word, an energy or a force.
Yeah.
And karma is more of a cause and effect.
Yeah, like I said, it's hard because a lot of
Yeah.
times we also want to think of it like that's what the only term that comes to my head is like the hocus pocus sense of it, you know. Like I said, kind of the like oogity boogity, ooh, like the other thing out in the universe, and it can be that for you if that's what you believe. Then it can be that literal sense, like I can sense that I have this welling of goodness that I want to send out, and for you that can be exactly that. But if that's not the path that you're like, oh, that sounds kind of like hard for me to understand or conceptualize this massive energy, then you can practice it in that notion of like, that's fine, I don't have to believe in it that way, but that when I come together, just in my example, that one example, if I come together, that even just me being here and being supportive is good for that. That's the energy, the good energy.
Small side I was gonna always be in, but it would actually probably go good here.
I was like, I'm not gonna go heavy on that because I know that these two are really tough. It's the same thing with the enlightenment and nirvana. They kind of clash into each other, and they can similarly be like this, where it's karma and merit, and you're like, wait, what? Yeah, and it takes some time and takes reflection afterwards too. Like, go reflect on it and think about that, and then find those notions of what you do in your own daily practice. But then, yeah, the things that you had, she had a really great
Oh no, I
quote.
decided new notes.
Oh no, but if we have time, I want you to do some of your quotes because they were really good.
But
They made me think.
this may help a little, because for me, I have a hard time conceptualizing energy and spirit and sending out this bank of merit that you can transfer to people. But it is a practice. Buddhism is a practice at its core. When you say, well, what is Buddhism? It's a practice. It's not a thing. It's not, some people, it is a religion. Some people, again, it's more of a practice of mindfulness. So going back to the mosquito, it's very easy to hit it and to also think about karma in the sense of, oh man, next time I'm going to be born as a mosquito. But practicing that compassion, and for me it is hard because sometimes the easiest thing to do is kill that mosquito. There's a roach. Easiest thing to do is you get a piece of toilet paper, kill it, trash, instead of, oh, I gotta find a cup, a paper. But that practice starts to instill things in your mind over time. Every time you do that, you're practicing a little bit of compassion. And then when bigger things come up, that's not a little mosquito. Maybe he's really making me angry at work. And I want to just go off, I want to have a reaction, but instead, because I've been practicing more compassion, more mindfulness, instead, I'm able to respond and take a second and hold myself back and be more compassionate with, like, oh, maybe something's going on, maybe he's having a really rough day. So it's more of a practice why we do these things. Same thing with merit and the chanting. Even if you took out the spiritual part of it and oh, I really believe that this is sending energy to the world and going to make the world better. If you took that out, just practicing the compassion, practicing that, I'm going to sit here for an hour and chant and practice that I'm going to be sending this good energy out to the world, that starts to change your brain and the way it works. And you do start to be more mindful. And if you do that long enough, you start to change. And also practicing meditation, the Eightfold Path, it does start to change who you are as a person, whether or not you're sending, actually changing the world by sitting there. You are. Because if you're changing and you're interacting with the world, then you are changing the world little by little by doing those practices. Hope that clears it up just a little
I
bit.
know. I'm like, it's heavy for me because I'm we work good as a team because she can expand on all the things. I'm like, ah. I'm very like specific. This is what the title of the book says. Yeah, and like I said, it's hard for me because like when I teach the basic surface of these topics, it can sometimes make more sense when you actually do get a little deeper into understanding it in those little rabbit holes, like going deep into the topics. But it's hard sometimes to understand just at the face value of learning initially that to these, get the basic surface of it, and then go expand on it. And then when you come up with those questions, when you confront something and you're like, I don't quite understand, like I'm reading this and now I have a greater understanding, I have the knowledge, but I need the wisdom. And so then that's when you can like write your note out about the specific of it, and then either you talk to members of the Sangha, or you can also talk to monastics. So there's always opportunity. You can have like one-on-one conversations with monastics on your own even, where you can just set up to come up here one day and just discuss questions you have about these notions, so that you can get a little deeper into like Dharma with it.
What's
So-
what monastics?
A monk or a
Monk.
nun. Hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
Okay.
monastics is an encompassing term for either a monk or a nun.
Oh, okay.
Hmm. And right now, go ahead. You want to share?
And I was also just gonna say, and I really struggled too. Like she said, it's sometimes when you get deeper that it starts to resonate. Because first thing you do is you go to YouTube and you type in what is Buddhism, what was the life of Buddha, and you get that very surface understanding. And it took a long time and multiple exposures and starting to read books and get deeper before I resonated. Because at first I was like, I don't know if I buy this. I don't know if we live multiple lives. I don't know if we can really stop merit. I don't want to do things for merit, so I don't quite understand. And it is really when I started going a little deeper than that it started to resonate as more of a practice that I wanted to do than just the very surface level, you know, like what you would give a 5-year-old, like this was the life of, you know, it does help to learn some more and see if it resonates.
Are there any books that y'all like recommend? Because like I know there's the book for reading, but like I'm looking for something like different that helps me like more in this facet than just.
I'm a dive hard, dive deep person, so I always tell people just go straight to the source.
Okay.
My personal opinion is I feel that sometimes throughout history, as with all things in history, they can get diluted through time.
Yeah.
And so to go back to some of the original teachings of Buddha and the Buddhist texts, we as humans love to complicate things, you know, and that's one thing that Buddha expanded on a lot, is that we just really complicate things for no good reason. I mean, there's reasons, of course, and it's good if you think it's good, but it doesn't have to be complicated. It can be super simple. I am not, like, in the beginning of when I first started with Buddhism, I was like, ooh, man, I gotta read and read till my eyes bleed. And then I started realizing, okay, it's not really about how much I know. There's wisdom with that. Like, there is a good sense of, yes, you should have a basic understanding.
Right.
That way you can build on that and expand, but you shouldn't be so focused on the knowledge base that that's all that it consumes for you. The practice is more important than reading the books about it. It's just the actions of doing and being present. That sounds like what? But it really, you'll hear Ty say that a lot. The abbot here, our head monk, he'll say that a lot. Like, it's more about, like, you can have all the knowledge in the world, but is that really wisdom? And so you have those, we talked a little bit about that last time, knowledge and wisdom, and how do those fit? Knowledge is like the book smarts. Wisdom is putting forth of the action of being able to practice it, knowing exactly what it means. And so there's a lot of people who have a lot of knowledge, but not the wisdom. I know, yeah.
But is there anything that's like, do you recommend anything that's kind of like?
I was gonna say, this is a very good book, The Hidden Lamb. It's one of the first ones that I read, and it had a lot of very digestible, shorter stories. Another good one that was recommended by one of the monks, Tantoy, was Who Ordered This Truckload of Dung? And that was another fun.
Who ordered
Who
Who
what?
ordered this truckload of dung?
And that is, I believe, a Thai monk.
I'll pull them up here too, like I said, so you
Yeah.
guys can get ISBNs and
Ajahn Brahm.
stuff.
And that's pretty good too.
So we only have a few minutes left. Is there anything that you'd like to share, a quote or a book phrase that you feel is a really good thing to reflect
Which we
on?
were just talking about wisdom. Without the mindfulness of meditation, the flame of wisdom is blown about by the winds of passion. It is one of my favorite quotes.
Repeat that again. Repeat
Yeah.
that again.
I know.
Without the mindfulness, without the stability of meditation, the flame of wisdom is blown about by the wind of passion. So, yeah. I was also gonna, do we have time?
Yeah, you got a couple minutes.
As far as take it if you need it, leave it if you don't kind of mindset, there is a reason and also intention. This could open up a lot, but I'll talk about that with enlightenment and nirvana. But karma no longer applies to you once you hit that full awakening nirvana state. And along with that, there's steps and depths to awakening. And then you start to realize that certain rules, certain precepts, laws start to get a little more gray because you're kind of going past that, needing that in your life. And there is a really good story that I'll try to say kind of efficiently. So there's two monks, and they're walking and they're traveling, and they have all their precepts, and there's a lot of rules for monks. They come up to a river, and there's a woman there, and she's trying to cross, but she can't. The water's moving too fast. And one of the monks says, "I'll help you." And he picks her up and carries her across, and she thanks him. And then the two monks start to travel again. A few hours pass, and finally the second monk looks at him and he goes, "You know, you just violated one of our main precepts. Like, you can't touch a woman, let alone carry her wet through a river and take her to the other side. You know, that's a huge violation. Why would you do that?" And he said, "You know, I carried that woman for a couple of minutes and helped her cross that river, but you've been carrying that woman for the last 2 hours." And I really, that's one of my favorite stories, because it's like, yeah, he only carried her for a few minutes, but this monk's been carrying her the whole time they've been walking in his mind. And that's just, like when I hear those stories, my mind starts to do things, and I'm like, oh, okay, you get a little deeper, and all of a sudden you get a little bit more understanding to how karma works, and intention, and mindfulness, and just trying to think of things a little bit different than
I
just
feel like
simply, oh, we shouldn't do this.
the book, The Truckload of Dung, Who Ordered This Truckload of Dung, there's little stories basically, and they're like recent stories, I would say, not like old school talking about monks crossing rivers and stuff.
Yeah, he's still
Some of
alive
it.
even talks.
Yeah, but it's relatable content, and so, but there's stories that make you then reflect back about those notions that you're hearing in the story, and some of them are they're just funny. Like I giggled quite a few times reading some of those, and then there's some more serious ones too. But it really is helpful because it just really helps you to, like I said, more often than not, I think reflection is a very important part of all learning within this, because without the reflection, you can't necessarily move forward past where you're at in this state and time. So, like, you know, what she had said, the story she just said may have highlighted something within you that you're now reflecting on. A notion that maybe you're like, well, duh, right? But it's something you don't necessarily think about until it's right in your face. And so that's the simplicity of what Buddhism needs to be. It's the simple reflections at times that you're like, oh. And so never to have the ego too, where you think, well, I already learned about that. I don't need to hear that again. I always tell people, like I told everyone at the last class too, the encouragement is don't just hear it from one source. Hear it from many. Whether that's monastics, sangha, just people out in the community talking about it, wherever it is for you, a book. And hear different ways of it so that you can make sure also that the information is correct. Because some people may not get it right, or it may just be that they have diluted it somehow and they don't maybe even realize they did. But that way you can also come to that context of what is correct in my understanding and how do I choose to practice with it. So that's the best way it can help you move.
We'll go into it more when we talk about enlightenment. But one of the basic principles, and we were listening to actually another master teacher from Washington, and he was talking about how we all have this Buddha nature, which, I mean, everyone teaches. They teach it here as well. We all have it inside us. It's innate. We just kind of cover it with everything else that goes on in our lives. But once you're at least starting to practice mindfulness and starting to meditate, you start to get a beacon that when something doesn't feel right or sound right or just doesn't resonate correctly with you, you start to be able to discern that yourself. And even Buddha, famously, they take it out of context how he said it, but you know, don't believe it just because I say it. Actually practice it. That's the number one thing. Just practice, and little changes over time, but you start to develop that sense of your innate Buddha nature can tell when something is correct or not correct.
Makes sense.
And the more you practice, the better that gets as well.
So I'm going to go ahead and end right now. We'll do the same thing we did in the beginning. We'll just have a moment with 3 bell tones. You're welcome to stick around. Like I said, I've got stuff, the book references and all that stuff. And then if you guys want to chill, we can chill afterwards here. Like, I'm not pressed for time. So. It's up to you, okay? Thank you everyone for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you. When's the next class gonna be?
Good question.
As soon as I can figure that out.
Thanks everybody. Saying hello and goodbye to our online friends.